Hello Year 10. Today we're going to be exploring the poem Remains by Simon Armitage. I think it's probably one of my favourite poems in your anthologies, and I look forward to seeing what you think of it as well. So our plan of action is to look at the context, our AO3. I'll then read the poem. We'll then spend some time analysing it and doing a consolidation task at the end, kind of the same structure as we have been doing with the poems so far. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing I want you to think about, and you don't necessarily need to write anything down for this, it's more just to give you an understanding of what the poem is going to be dealing with. A quote from the poet is this, top left. These are poems of survivors, the damaged, exhausted men who return from war in body but never wholly in mind. And I'd like you to look at those images and think about how conflict has affected these men. So on the left, it's before, and then during, and then after. So what changes do you see in their appearance? And what are your first impressions on the power conflict has over these lives? Now, this poem is from a collection of poetry written by Armitage called The Not Dead, I think. And there's a couple of clips on YouTube. This poem Remains is based on a true story. And what Armitage seeks to explore is the effects of war on men, and the effects that mental trauma have on these men returning from war. Okay. So this is a true story, and the bullet points pretty much sum up what is going to happen in the poem. So the soldiers were called to clear a bank in Iraq which was being looted. As they approached the bank, one man ran out, so they shot him. They also had to clear the building on 4 other levels. And once it was cleared, the soldier who the poem's perspective is told through was on the roof looking down, and he could see and hear the Iraqi man still screaming on the road, like writhing in agony. Eventually the man was carted off in a lorry. He never saw him again. But it's the first time that soldier had killed anyone. And you'll see in the documentary, he can't bring himself to say words. He says, it's the first time I'd ended someone's life. And it affected him greatly. He didn't really get help for his PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and he left the army. And as a result, he turned to petty crime, drinking, doing drugs, to try and get rid of that memory of that day in Iraq. The poem is about the after effects of war. And what Armitage says is, whilst he was doing interviews with these soldiers or ex-soldiers, a lot of their kind of stories revolved around this key traumatic incident. And up here on the right is a quote from a trauma psychiatrist called Judith Lewis Herman. And she says, the conflict between the will to deny the horrible events and the will to proclaim them aloud is the central dialectic of psychological trauma. So you're reliving this memory constantly, but you can't find the words to articulate what it is you're experiencing. And that's what causes psychological trauma. So you might want to jot some of this stuff down in your anthology before we go on to look at the poem in detail. So pause here if you need to. Okay, so here's the poem. On a first look, you can see it's fairly clearly structured, series of quatrains and then a couplet right at the end. So it looks pretty orderly, but as always with war poetry, it reveals a slightly more chaotic side to the soldier's life. So, on another occasion, we got sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank, and one of them legs it up the road, probably armed, possibly not. Well, myself and somebody else are all of the same mind, so all 3 of us open fire. 3 of a kind all let him fly, and I swear I see every round as it rips through his life. I see broad daylight on the other side. So we've hit this looter a dozen times, and he's there on the ground, sort of inside out, pain itself the image of agony. One of my mates goes by and tosses his guts back into his body, and he's carted off in the back of a lorry. End of story, except not really. His blood shadow stays on the street, and out on patrol I walk right over it week after week. Then I'm home on leave, but I blink, and he bursts again through the doors of the bank. Sleep, and he's probably armed and possibly not. Dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds, and the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. He's here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand, but near to the knuckle here and now. his bloody life in my bloody hands. Okay, so if you don't have your anthology with you, it might be worth copying out each stanza so you can annotate it. So you might want to pause the tape now so you can do that. Okay, we're going to look at a couple of stanzas at a time, and I've highlighted the bits you could annotate and round the sides of questions you can consider to help inform your annotations. So similarly to Bayonet Charge, we start in media res, we're in the action, and I suppose Armitage is doing that because the soldier is like repeating this memory constantly, and he's almost trapped in this cycle, and so are we. This is all we get to see as well of what he remembers. So on another occasion, we got sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank, and one of them legs it up the road, possibly armed, possibly not. And you see here on another occasion, it tells us how frequently this happened. It was constant, it was all the time, it was another occasion, nothing special. And the way Armitage uses language here is very colloquial, which means it's quite conversational and chatty. It's almost anecdotal, like he's telling the story at a pub. And we see this kind of hesitation here, probably armed, possibly not. And in a way, we definitely get the sense of uncertainty, but it's almost as if this quite important moral detail and legal detail is just skimmed over. So he's probably armed, but he might not be. We don't actually know. And I think that tells us the heart of his guilt, because this could have just been some innocent man. And then the next stanza, well, myself and somebody else are all of the same mind. So all three of us open fire, three of a kind, all letting fly, and I swear. And this polysynthetic listing, so remember that's when you use connectives more than you need to. It makes him sound kind of childish and inexperienced. And the somebody else gives us this sense of anonymity and joint responsibility as well. They're all of the same mind, they all open fire. So he's not taking responsibility for his actions because everyone's doing it. And I think he's almost trying to convince himself with the repetition of all, like everyone was in on it, we're all doing it. There's a sense of solidarity there. And you get this little reference here, three of a kind, which is a poker term. And I suppose already we're getting the hint that the soldier perhaps turns to gambling as a coping mechanism when he returns. It's subtle, but it's there nonetheless. And you've got this and I swear, you can almost imagine it's like a lad down the pub telling his mates a story. It's this kind of traditional laddish masculinity, but really it's hiding something quite emotional underneath. So I would pause it there to take some notes. Alright, stanzas 3 and 4. So he says, I swear, I see every round as it rips through his life. I see broad daylight on the other side. So we've hit this looter a dozen times and he's on the ground, sort of inside out. And that kind of rips through his life is so brutal, but it's just matter of fact. It's disturbingly casual, the way it's phrased, as if it's so everyday that that's all it is. There's no emotion there. It's just a statement. And that first line I see, rips through his life. That rips through his life description is just monosyllabic. It's very simplistic. And then you've got here, that description of him being sort of inside out. And I suppose that goes back to the idea that it's a graphic description again, but it's almost quite childlike. As though the soldier is unable to articulate what he's seen. And in the documentary it says, that's the first time anything like that, that's the first time he'd experienced something like that, so he's struggling to find the words to articulate what he's actually witnessing, sort of inside out. And it says, pain itself, the image of agony. One of my mates goes by and tosses his guts back into his body, and he's carted off in the back of a lorry. Here, the image of agony, the speaker clearly appreciates the pain that the man is in, but there's a sense of detachment there, Like, you can appreciate that he looks like he's in pain, but he can't really seem to empathise. It's almost like he's an onlooker just watching, like he's not involved in it. And again, you've got that graphic imagery again, like his mate just tosses his guts back into his body like it's nothing. And then he's carted off in the back of a lorry. And you've got those little half rhymes there that again makes it sound almost a bit childish, like it's just a story. But that's what makes it even more sinister. And again, the way that the looter's body is dealt with just highlights like how meaningless his life is. It's callous. He's treating him like rubbish disposal. He's just carted off in a lorry, like it's nothing. And I suppose it almost seems like the soldier telling this story is normalising the violence, but again, I think that's covering up stuff that he can't quite articulate. Okay. Stanzas 5 and 6. End of story, except not really. His blood shadow stays on the street, and out on patrol I walk right over it week after week. And I'm home on leave, but I blink. And I suppose that metaphor of the blood shadow is talking about that permanence, that sense of permanence, and that visual reminder of the soldier's actions, like what he did. And where it says end of story with caesura and then not really, I suppose it's telling us about the lasting effects of war, and he's almost bitter, like not really, like he's got nothing, but he's still thinking about it. And it tells us that the effects of conflict are long lasting, and the week after week just really cements in our mind how this flashback is haunting him. It's there constantly. He can't stop thinking about it. It's kind of continuous. And then you've got that stanza 6. So I blink and he bursts again through the doors of the bank. Sleep, and he's probably armed and possibly not. Dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds. And the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. Again, you've got quite a few places here, like blink, burst, bank, and it's almost like little mini explosions going off in his head because the memories are so traumatic. You've got this reference to sleeping and dreaming, which the beady-eyed among you will have noticed is kind of a reference to Macbeth, and we see another one later, but it kind of refers to the torment that Macbeth feels after he kills Duncan about Macbeth has murdered sleep, dream no more. And I suppose here Armitage is kind of nodding to the guilt that the soldier feels too. And you've got the repetition of that line from earlier, probably armed, possibly not. Like that's what the guilt is centred on. He's haunted by possibilities. And here we get a very obvious kind of reference to the returning soldier's coping mechanisms. Like he's trying desperately to forget about the incident and he can't. And the man is constantly in his thoughts, but he can't articulate them properly. He can't say like, I feel so guilty and I'm traumatized by what I did and what I saw. And it seems rushed. It's quite quick to read to show that he's a bit breathless and doesn't know how to speak about it. So pause it if you need to. And then stanzas 7 and 8. He's here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in the desert sand, but near to the knuckle, here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. And for me, I think here in those lines at the start, he sounds despairing and desperate, and that metaphor about being dug in behind enemy lines just shows that he never leaves his memories. And the way he says, like, left for dead in some distant sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, it's a mouthful. It's quite hard to say. Makes me sound quite lispy. And I suppose it's because he feels suffocated by the memory. It's meant to make us stumble over those words. It's not meant to be easy to say. And again, you've got this detachment that he knows it's not enough. And he's highlighting the indignity of the death, yet again, the lack of respect. And the enjambment here, so carrying on from here to here, just shows that continuation of his feelings. And like, the rhythm is repeated, but near to the knuckle, here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. And it just shows the bitterness, the anger, and the regret. And you've got that little link again to Lady Macbeth trying to wash her hands to cleanse the guilt, but it's never enough. So that's me rambling on about the poem. Sorry, I quite like that poem. I get quite into it, but it's brilliant. And there's just one more task I'd like you to do once you've annotated these final stanzas. So pause the video now if you have to. And similar to before, this is your final task. So I would like you to attempt at least one from each colour in your exercise books or on a Word document, because it's all very well annotating the poem, but it's what you do with those annotations, how you form meaning from them. Some of you have sent through such incredible work on that. I've been so impressed by the detail of your responses and how perceptive you've been as well. So keep that up. It's a joy to read all your ideas. What I'll also do is I'll go and Teams. I'll put a little link to that YouTube video on the guy talking about his experiences, because it is pretty harrowing. It makes us see things from the other perspective, which is really interesting. Anyway, that is it from me. I hope you're all well. Looking forward to seeing some of you this week at school. And do let me know if you have any questions. Take care, everyone.